May 24th, 1945. In the control tower of Yontan Airfield in Okinawa, Marine pilot Lieutenant Maynard Kelley tracks yet another enemy bomber through his field glasses. But this one isn't climbing away like the others. It's descending fast, props silent, nose aimed directly at his position. He mumbles, quote, "What the hell?" The bomber slams into the tarmac just 100 yards away, metal shrieking against concrete, sparks showering into the darkness. The aircraft skids to a brutal stop, too controlled for an accident. Before Kelley can shout a warning, the doors burst open. From the wreckage, dark figures pour out one by one. It's not a dazed aircrew, but heavily armed men. 10, maybe 12. Rifles already up, fanning out across the runway in practiced formation, moving fast and exposed, with no thought of cover or retreat. Shocked, Kelley's hand finds his sidearm as realization hits. This isn't a crash. It's an assault. Operation Iceberg. By the spring of 1945, with Iwo Jima secured and bomber crews finally within reach of Tokyo, the United States had one last obstacle to clear: Okinawa. The largest island in the Ryukyu chain, it sat just 340 miles from Kyushu, Japan's southernmost main island. It offered airfields, anchorages, and a staging ground for the final assault on the empire. As dawn broke on Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1945, with Operation Iceberg in full motion, a fleet of more than 1,300 ships stretched across 40 miles of coastline, all headed toward Okinawa. From the decks of troop ships and transports, landing craft packed with 60,000 American troops fanned out toward the shore. Once in the sand, the United States 10th Army advanced in two thrusts. To the south, the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions leapt from their landing craft, while to the north, the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions moved inland quickly. Their weapons were primed for battle, but as they pushed forward, they found only silence. The enemy, it seemed, was gone. By mid-morning, tanks and equipment were rolling ashore past abandoned Japanese positions. The expected beach fight had evaporated, and now, commanders marked their maps with rapid advances, while puzzled intelligence officers questioned scared locals. As noon arrived, the men of the 1st Marine Division could finally see their objective in the distance, the Yontan Airfield. Less than a mile inland from the Hagashi beaches, the Yontan Airfield had two parallel runways that ran nearly 5,000 feet each, flanked by revetments, repair bays, and scattered hangars. Built by the Japanese the year before, the Americans were about to turn it into one of their most crucial staging grounds. Construction teams then rolled in, patching the runways and marking taxi lines. Mere hours after clearing the way, F-4U Corsairs from escort carriers USS Sitco Bay and USS Breton thundered in, with 80 out of the 109 aircraft being combat-ready within minutes, and a full combat air patrol airborne by sunset. With evening falling, the nearby airfield of Kadena was also in American hands. Fewer than 300 Americans had died taking both fields, the start to the Okinawa landings so smooth it seemed almost unreal. But this wasn't luck. It was a full-fledged trap. The heroic paratroopers. Sure enough, just south of the beachhead, where the island terrain rose into steep ridges and forested hills, General Mitsuru Ushijima's 32nd Army, made up of 100,000 men, was positioned in a layered defense across the limestone heights of southern Okinawa. Here, in what the Americans would soon call the Shuri Line, the Japanese had one purpose only: to slow the advance, no matter the cost. At sea, the skies above the American fleet were turning into battlegrounds. On April 6th, wave after wave of 355 Japanese aircraft, many of them kamikazes, drove headlong into picket destroyers, ammunition ships, and troop transports. Japan was now sacrificing pilots to hold the island. But that was only the beginning. The High Command was preparing to send a far more surgical weapon: commandos trained to strike deep inside Allied airfields and not expected to return. Months before, as the situation deteriorated across the Pacific, the Imperial Japanese Army formed a new unit, Giretsu Kutetai. Translated to English as Heroic Paratroopers, this airborne commando team was a last-ditch attempt to try and reduce Allied bombing raids on the Japanese home islands. Commanded by Lieutenant General Michio Sugahara, the Giretsu Kutetai was made up of volunteers, most of them combat veterans, trained not for defense, but for insertion and sabotage missions far behind enemy lines. Operations would unfold during nighttime, beginning with bomber strikes to create initial chaos. Then came the commandos, dropping silently by parachute when possible, or crash-landing their transports directly onto enemy runways. Once on the ground, these elite warriors had orders to slash fuel lines, plant explosives on parked aircraft, sever communication cables, and take down Allied air operations from within. Their strict training reflected these goals. Endless drills on explosive placement, nighttime infiltration techniques, and rapid assault patterns across mock-up airfields. But the Giretsu Kuteitai's mission briefings contained one glaring omission: extraction plans. In keeping with Imperial military doctrine that rejected surrender as an option, the heroic paratrooper operations were designed as one-way missions. There would be no rescue aircraft, no reinforcement teams, no evacuation strategy. Each commando understood that, like their kamikaze counterparts in the air, these men were expected to complete their objective with no consideration for personal survival. Their first mission was an attack on the Aslito Airfield on Saipan in the Mariana Islands, scheduled for Christmas Eve, 1944, but was called off after American raids damaged the planned refueling airfields on Iwo Jima. Subsequent operations targeting captured airfields were similarly abandoned as Allied forces continued their advance across the Pacific. For months, the commandos of Giretsu Kuteitai remained grounded, armed, trained, and waiting. So when Easter Sunday brought American bombers flying from Okinawa, they had their target, and their chance to tip the fight back in Japan's favor. Precious target. Through April, Marine aircraft groups' numbers swelled from a modest patrol to a constant aerial shield, launching more than 3,500 sorties from Yontan and nearby Kadena that month, claiming 143 enemy aircraft in dogfights over the embattled island. By late May, nearly 2 months after the invasion, Yontan had become a vital operating hub for the U.S. campaign on Okinawa, with the F-4U Corsairs roaring down runways, F-6F Hellcat night fighters patrolling the night, R-5C commando transports arriving loaded with supplies and leaving carrying wounded, and PB-4Y2 privateers launching one patrol run after another over open water. In the background, fuel trucks moved massive barrels of precious oil between parking areas. Ordnance crews rolled bombs out from supply tents. Marine controllers tracked incoming flights from the control towers and managed the outbound rush. Compared to the chaos further south near Shuri, Yontan felt stable and secure, almost like the war was happening somewhere else. But despite the around-the-clock activity, the airfield was not well guarded, and the Japanese High Command was already preparing to prove it. As General Mitsuru Ushijima, commander of the Japanese 32nd Army, prepared to withdraw the remnants from the collapsing Shuri line, he contacted the Giretsu Kuteitai's Lieutenant General Michiro Sugihara for a strike on this very airfield in order to create a diversion for his withdrawing troops. Now, for the first time since their formation, the elite airborne sabotage force that had trained for months without deploying had their first operational target. Now or never. Under the leadership of Captain Michiro Okuyama, the raid force transferred from Nishitsukuba, northeast of Tokyo, all the way to Kumamoto for final preparations. Once there, now closer than ever to Okinawa, the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service provided them with 12 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bombers stripped down of their guns and modified with extra exits for rapid deployment. Each aircraft would carry a small Giretsu team, roughly a dozen men, along with weapons, explosives, and incendiary charges. The plan was direct: fly in low over the sea, crash land or disembark at Yontan, and destroy as many aircraft and fuel stores as possible, all while knowing they would never leave the runway alive. Though the strike was scheduled for the night of May 23rd, weather over Okinawa forced a 24-hour delay. Finally, just after sunset on May 24th, 12 Sally bombers lifted off from Kengun Airfield and began the 4-hour flight to Okinawa, 8 of them destined for Yontan and 4 to nearby Kadena. At the controls were pilots of the 3rd Independent Flying Squadron, led by Captain Shuichi Swabe, who made it clear to his men there would be no return. In the cargo holds, the Giretsu commandos sat in silence, checking their weapons one last time, each of them prepared for a one-way mission in the name of their country. Over the Japanese skies, 4 of the Sallies, riddled with engine problems, had no choice but to abort the mission. Not long after, 3 additional aircraft were successfully intercepted and shot down by American night fighters while en route to Okinawa. but 5 were already on their way, ready as ever. And back at Yontan Airfield, the evening unfolded as usual, everyone blissfully unaware that their routine night was about to shatter. Moonlight over Yontan. On the night of May 24th, 1945, United States Marine Corps First Lieutenant Maynard Kelley found himself stationed in the most exposed position on Yontan Airfield, the radio tower that overlooked the entire complex. That evening, the 22-year-old, assigned to Marine Fighting Squadron 533, was serving as duty officer rotation alongside Sergeant Leroy D. Hall, the evening's tower operator, and Sergeant Robert N. Dietrich. Together, the 3 Marines handled the airfield's nerve center, coordinating traffic, logging aircraft movements, and relaying updates to Group Command. Rather mundane work for a fighter pilot like Kelley, itching to get back in the cockpit. Around 9 p.m., a duo of enemy bombers swept over the field at high altitude, releasing their payloads before disappearing back into the darkness, well beyond the reach of American anti-aircraft fire. From his perch in the tower, Kelley watched them escape with visible frustration and exclaimed, quote, "I'd give $50 to be up there and able to get a shot at those guys." Over the next hour, more bombers appeared sporadically, some dropping ordnance, others simply probing the defenses before vanishing into the night. What nobody in the Yontan Airfield knew was that these high-altitude raids were merely a diversion and the opening move in a much larger plan. Then, just before 10 p.m., 3 more enemy aircraft appeared, this time descending directly toward the airfield. Now exhilarated with the thrill of battle, Kelley's voice rose with anticipation, quote, "The ante has just been raised. I'd give $75 to be up there right now." He wouldn't have to wait long. At 10:30 p.m., the anti-aircraft batteries erupted once again. The system's bright red tracers sliced through the night sky, streaming just overhead and forcing Hall, Kelley, and Dietrich to throw themselves behind the sandbags that lined the tower's observation deck. Somewhere out there, the men knew an enemy aircraft was approaching fast and low, but in the moonless night, it remained invisible. Without warning, a Japanese bomber, struck by American shells, disintegrated in a massive, catastrophic explosion. The aircraft had been racing toward the north-south runway, barely at treetop level, when the anti-aircraft gunners found their mark and turned it into burning metal. Its twisted wreckage scattered across the ground, only a couple hundred yards away from the tower, so close to the 3 crouching Marines that they could smell it. Hit the ground running. Before the trio could even begin standard emergency protocol, they heard even more anti-aircraft fire aimed at another low target just east of the field. It was clearly visible. This was a second twin-engine Sally bomber, using the orange glow cast by the burning wreckage of the first model, now approaching the airfield. Lieutenant Kelley yelled, quote, "What the hell?" As it slipped through the fusillade of American fire, the enemy pilot cut his Sally's engines and descended toward the airfield, touching down hard on the northeast-southwest runway, its belly scraping across the tarmac in a shower of sparks before skidding to a violent stop just 100 yards from the control tower. Thinking some of the crew might still be alive, Kelley got up from the ground and grabbed the field glasses. Through them, he could see 6 to 8 armed figures pouring from the plane's open doors, and the reality struck him like a physical blow. Yontan Airfield was under attack. Watching enemy commandos a mere football field length away from where he stood, something shifted inside Maynard Kelley. Without thinking twice, the young pilot dropped his binoculars and snatched his .38 service revolver from his holster. With no time to say goodbye to his mates, the brave pilot rappelled down the ladder and hit the ground running, sprinting toward a nearby jeep, determined to meet these invaders face to face. From above, Hall followed him with his eyes, then turned back to the landing strip. Grabbing his own pair of field glasses, the young man trained them on the same bomber and watched additional men slip from the aircraft's blind side and drop into combat crouches. Trying to get ahead of them, the sergeant yelled as loud as he could to a group of nearby Marines who had just stumbled from nearby dugouts, alerted and dizzy from the explosions and anti-aircraft fire. Listening to his instructions, they grabbed their rifles and scrambled toward firing positions along the road that bordered the airfield. Other Marines, caught completely off guard, dove for cover beneath the control tower as enemy fire began pinging off metal structures. Now, with all on the ground, the 10 to 12 Japanese commandos, part of the elite Gidetsu Kuteitai, finally spread out in practiced formation and began their advance toward the rows of American aircraft parked across the runway. The attackers wasted no time, hurling grenades and slapping incendiary charges onto aircraft fuselages. as chaos erupted among maintenance crews and service personnel who found themselves trapped in the middle of a battlefield that had materialized around them in mere seconds. Not on my watch. The Japanese began crawling forward, firing their Tommy guns and rifles in bursts, some aiming at aircraft, others directing fire toward the control tower. From above, Dietrich and Hall watched in horror as several enemy commandos turned directly toward Kelley's jeep, guns aimed right at him. They shouted for the lieutenant to come back, but their voices were lost in the melee of gunfire and explosions. One of the American planes, hit by Japanese incendiary charges, erupted in a massive fireball. The explosion bloomed directly in front of Kelley's jeep, the blast wave and searing heat stopping the vehicle's advance. Without hesitation, the American pilot leapt from the driver's seat and began sprinting back toward the tower, determined to reach the radio equipment and alert his entire squadron by telephone. He'd made it only a few yards when he could hear voices shouting in a foreign language behind him, boots slapping against concrete, getting closer with each second. The commandos were pursuing him, their rifle fire cracking past his head as he ran. Kelley then spun around, raised his .38, and began firing at the advancing figures. His shots rang out clear above the chaos as he yelled, quote, "I got him. I got that one." Fires were spreading all across the entire airfield. Marines scrambled from positions all around the perimeter, moving toward the Japanese infiltrators with rifles ready. From the ground, these men yelled back up to Hall and Dietrich in the tower to turn the spotlight on the enemy positions to aim better in the darkness. Hearing these desperate calls, Kelley understood immediately what had to be done, no matter the odds. Still firing his revolver with one hand, the 22-year-old reached the base of the tower and began climbing the ladder with desperate speed. Behind him, Japanese gunfire intensified. A bullet caught him in the chest halfway up the ladder, but Kelley kept climbing anyway. Just as he reached the top, the injured pilot dragged himself to the spotlight controls and threw the switch. A powerful 1,000-watt-strong beam of light illuminated the vulnerable enemy commandos, who until then were somewhat protected by the night sky as they cleverly wove between aircraft. Marines across the field immediately opened up with concentrated fire on the newly visible targets. When his fellow Marines reached him moments later, they found First Lieutenant Maynard Kelley slumped over the spotlight controls, his finger still wrapped around the trigger. The resistance at Yontan Airfield. As the Japanese commandos concentrated more and more fire on the control tower, Hall grabbed his rifle and scrambled down to join the Marines on the road below, leaving Dietrich to maintain watch from above. With more American aircraft bursting into flames and Kelley's spotlight cutting through the smoke, the entire airfield was illuminated. Over 40 Marines were fired at by the Japanese commandos just 60 yards away. They were led by Lieutenant Clark C. Campbell and Technical Sergeant Chandler M. Beasley from VMF 542, who quickly took charge. They organized the scattered defenders into disciplined firing lines, turning the once chaotic firefight into a resistance. Their orders were simple: fire until every Japanese in Yontan had stopped breathing. Even the anti-aircraft guns swiveled down to target the airfield itself. Despite the overwhelming firepower, the Japanese darted between burning aircraft. When one of them fell, two others hurled grenades at the American positions, forcing Marines to dive for cover. Meanwhile, the others continued to fire at more fighter planes before sprinting back toward their crashed bomber, regrouping to select new targets. Through the already messy chaos of ground combat, the distinctive roar of aircraft engines cut through the night. A formation of F-6F Hellcats suddenly appeared over the burning airfield, their pilots navigating through the smoke. It was Lieutenant Colonel Marion Magruder, leading his division back from combat air patrol, the Hellcats descending toward runways crisscrossed with tracer fire and littered with burning wreckage. One by one, the aircraft touched down between explosions, their pilots skillfully threading between friendly fire and enemy positions. As soon as the planes came to a stop, Magruder and his pilots abandoned their cockpits and grabbed weapons. They joined the other Americans in their foxholes, adding firepower to the defense of Yontan. Soon enough, the squadron commander learned that First Lieutenant Kelley, one of his own men, had fallen, manning the very spotlight that was helping them target the enemy. Midnight Raiders. As the organized defense took hold, two additional Japanese Sally bombers roared in low over the airfield, their pilots desperately trying to follow the first and so far only successful landing of the Gedetsu Kuteitai. Before they could do so, American anti-aircraft guns swiveled to track them, pouring fire into the night sky. The first bomber, riddled with bullets, erupted in flames and spiraled into the ground beyond the runway. The second aircraft, trailing smoke and fire, managed to crash land on the far side of the field in a grinding, sparking impact that sent debris flying across the tarmac, destroying most of the Sally. From the wreckage, 3 or 4 more Gidetsu commandos crawled out, injured but armed, and immediately began their mission, hurling incendiary charges at nearby aircraft and fuel dumps, spreading new fires across a previously untouched sector. By now, garrison troops from across the base had arrived as reinforcements, and the concentrated gunfire that had raged across Yontan began to subside, replaced by sporadic bursts as Marines hunted down the remaining infiltrators scattered throughout the complex. The firefight continued through the night and into the early morning hours, until finally, at 12:55 p.m. on May 25th, the last Japanese attacker was cornered and taken out, about a quarter mile behind Marine Aircraft Group 31's headquarters building. Of the 8 Sally bombers that had departed Japan bound for Yontan, only one made a successful landing. That single aircraft had delivered enough commandos to take the lives of 2 American servicemen, destroy 70,000 gallons of fuel and 9 aircraft, and damage 29 more before nearly being wiped out by the defenders. In total, 69 Japanese bodies were recovered and buried on the airfield after the raid. No prisoners were taken. What American forces didn't know was that one member of the raiding party had survived the night. Hidden in the jungle, he began a perilous journey across the battlefield that would take him nearly 3 weeks to complete. On June 12th, he finally reached the Japanese 32nd Army headquarters, carrying with him the only first-hand account of the Gidetsu Kuteitai's first and final mission. The price we pay. Within a week of the raid, the damaged aircraft were cleared from the field and replaced by new ones. Construction crews patched the runways, and Yontan Airfield was back to full capacity. But everything about its security changed. There were extended patrol rotations, and armed guards were on the clock. Meanwhile, the rest of Okinawa burned bright. In the south, all around the Shuri line, artillery flattened entire hills, while infantry fought house to house through villages caught in the crossfire. Casualties on both sides mounted daily. Japanese men named this phase of the battle Tetsu no Bofu, the Typhoon of Steel, for the storm of shells, bombs, and bullets that swept across the island without pause. Despite the rapid resolution, Japanese planners considered the Yontan attack a tactical success, as it proved that a small airborne unit could hit the Americans where it hurt. Encouraged by the results, they began organizing a second raid, Operation Ken-Go, aimed at the B-29 Superfortress bases in the Mariana Islands. This time, instead of 136 Gidetsu Kuteitai, the aim was to use nearly 1,000 kamikaze commandos. But before all that could happen, on August 9, 1945, a different kind of history touched down on Yontan's runway. Late that morning, the B-29 bomber, codenamed Boxcar, its silver fuselage gleaming in the Pacific sun, rolled to a stop on the tarmac after delivering the second atomic bomb to Nagasaki, rendering KG operations obsolete. As for First Lieutenant Maynard Kelley, his actions did not go unrecognized. The after-action report detailing his defense of the field led to a posthumous Navy Cross, honoring the man who gave his life at a forgotten airfield on a night when paratroopers fell from the sky for the first and final time.